This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to a special edition of the DRF Players Podcast. It's Boxing Day. We usually take this week off, but not this year. We're coming to you back by popular demand with one of our most popular guests from the 2017 season. We'll be introducing him in a minute. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. As I mentioned, the 1226 edition. This is show 296. Back with you today, not from the Brooklyn bunker, actually, but from my actual apartment upstairs, sitting in front of the Christmas tree in the holiday spirit doing the show. It's also quite possible that the U.S. Postal Service is going to redeliver a very important Christmas gift during the course of the next hour. So I wanted to be near. If I go silent and the voice you're about to hear takes over as host at any point, you'll just know I'm signing for a very important Christmas gift. The man I'm referring...
Whoa. No, the person whose gift it is isn't listening, so why don't you just tell us what it is? Are you embarrassed?
No, not embarrassed at all. There's a gift for my wife, Susan, I need to make sure is under that tree. And if it doesn't, I got a lot of running around to do the rest of the week. I arranged the redelivery specifically for today. And, I got to be there or it's not going to be such a Merry Christmas. There may end up being a lump of coal in my stocking. That voice you hear, you know him, you love him. He's the people's champ. He's Jonathan Kinchin. JK, what's up?
You just reminded me I got to do some Christmas shopping. I haven't done any yet.
Okay, just so folks know, we're recording this show on Tuesday, December 19th. So the people's champ leaves himself all of about 5 days to do his Christmas shopping.
But I do better in those situations. I can handicap a race better when there's 5 minutes to post. I feel like you kind of hunker down a little bit better. I was better writing papers in college the morning it was due. I just don't work well in advance.
A procrastinator. And the man we're about to introduce, I think he might be the opposite of a procrastinator. At least that's the impression I got when working with him on his new book, Betting with an Edge, a book that I know is in many Christmas stockings. It's actually perfectly sized. I tested it out the other day. Fits beautifully in the Christmas stocking. He's professional horse player Mike Maloney returning to the podcast. Mike, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, Pete. And no, I do not have all my Christmas shopping done.
You're more organized when it comes to handicapping races than you are with taking care of gift giving in your life?
I guess so. I need to prioritize better. I think the Remington Park comes in before Christmas shopping sometimes. So that's not good prioritizing this time of year.
Oh, that's tremendous. Oh, well,
yeah, but the thing is, if you don't hit the exact at a Remington, you might not be able to afford the Christmas present. So it kind of has to work that way.
That's my story too, JK.
So Mike's back by popular demand. A couple of weeks ago, he was here talking all about questions from you listeners about the new book, Betting with an Edge. We had so many and so many good ones. We've pressed him into service to come back here as a special holiday treat, not just to the listeners, but to us, because I feel like every time Mike comes on, we learn something, JK. You think that's about right?
Yeah, for sure.
And I know you had some questions last time.
Pete, I want to break in. I want to break in right there because
Please.
JK said that. He said that several times over the course of a couple of shows, and I appreciate that. But I just want to make clear the record, set the record straight, that I've learned at least as much from JK as he's ever learned from me.
That's some high praise right there. When you think about lessons you've learned from this younger generation of horse players, and we'll put JK in that list, Mike, what's one that comes to mind?
Well, it's more than any single specific thing. I think it's just someone that is, I consider JK at the very top of our craft. So any time that I get an opportunity to spend time with Jonathan and pick his brain a little bit, and I think we kind of pick each other's brain at the same time, that conversation is extremely helpful to me just to see what angles and what things Jonathan prioritizes and what he emphasizes in his handicapping. What made him like this horse? What made him think that horse was a bad favorite? How did he approach a race that we both were interested in, and we both bet. That's, it's fascinating to see, to have that conversation, to see, maybe he went with the exacta, maybe he made, got into the picks, and maybe I did it an entirely different way. So there's knowledge to be gleaned from those conversations, and I, it's not so much a specific thing that I can point out, but it's just always trying to improve your horseplay by gathering knowledge from people that are at the top level.
I'm so glad you mentioned that general idea, because I do think it's something that separates you, Mike, from a lot of players, and it's a perfect segue into a question we received. You talk to a lot of players, serious horse players, and they're almost afraid at times to listen to other people's opinions, afraid that will somehow change their mind or mess them up. And there's lots of phrases you hear around the track about this, about thinking long and thinking wrong, and how your ears can be your worst enemies, et cetera, et cetera. What is it about you that makes you want to internalize that other information from other players? Like, as you do so much work yourself, why aren't you better off just sort of shielding yourself from others' opinions and drilling down into your own work farther?
Well, because I'm not dumb enough or conceited enough to think that I know everything. I've tried hard for 30 or 40 years to learn everything I can about handicapping and horse racing, and I've read everything I can get my hands on and about handicapping, and I spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I have for years. But it just shows what a tremendous game playing the horses is, that you can spend a lifetime and be a fairly intelligent person and be a dedicated handicapper, and I still don't think you can really find out all the information there is out there to know. So every year I incorporate a couple of significant changes into the way that I handicap and the way I play. And, how that comes into effect is just, it's someone that I had a conversation with that mentioned something that got me to thinking, or said something that I thought really was valid, that I hadn't given enough weight in the past, or it's something that I read, or, something I hear on a podcast. It's just, I think my dad told me a long time ago, it wasn't about horse playing, it was about the small business that we ran. When I took over the business, he said, if you're not moving forward every year, if you're not making improvements and getting better at what you're doing, you're losing ground. And
Right.
He was exactly right about our small business, and that applies directly to handicapping and playing the horses also.
Research and development is the concept. And there's also a very interesting concept I learned from a terrific gambling podcast that actually, I believe it was Travis Stone was the first one to tell me about. It's called Gambling with an Edge, hosted by a guy named Bob Dancer and another guy named Richard Munchkin. And no, those are not their real names, but it's this really interesting advantage player podcast. They've actually expressed interest, Mike, in having you on, and we're talking about them today. Makes me want to follow up with them. But they talk about how one of the hidden traits of a successful, what they call advantage player, in other words, somebody playing any gambling game of chance, whatever you want to call it, but doing so with an expectation of a positive return, aka an AP or advantage player. One of the hidden traits that an AP can have is their ability to network. And I think what it gets to, sometimes with advantage play in card games or whatever, it's as simple as hearing about an available opportunity. But I also think secondarily, it ties into what you're saying, and it's that exchange of ideas to keep growing as a player. JK, that's a good question for you. And then, Mike, I'm going to come back at you with the same question. What's something new to your game that you've incorporated in 2017 that's helped you along the way? JK, we'll start with you on that one.
It's probably something I picked up from Mike. We joke about it. We've even joked about making T-shirts that say "Crush Their Souls." That's kind of my handicapping and betting personality, but Mike is kind of, it reminds me of that old saying. And if you don't know it, I'm not going to say it on here. It reminds me of that old saying about the cow that runs down the hill.
Yes. Famous story about the cow in the hill and the bull.
The bull in the hill. Yeah, the bull. He's taught me to walk a little bit and not run and take my time a little bit better and to use my ability to handicap, whether it's a good or not, my ability to handicap to do things that a little bit smarter through the window that might kind of give me, allow me to see another day. Instead of just trying to get that one cow, walk down there and you can maybe try to figure out a way to get them all. So that's kind of what I've picked up from Mike, because that's what he does every day, and that's what he has to do every day. Mike would have a tough time making a living if he lived by crush their souls only on a daily basis. It's too hard to do that in this game with takeout and the other players being as educated and as good as they have become.
We had an actual question about contrasting Crush Their Souls with Mike's betting philosophy, and we'll loop back to that. But first, I want to ask Mike that same question. You say every year you're picking up new things, Mike. What was one of the new things you picked up in 2017?
Well, I worked some on bet structure this year, Pete, and also in bet selection. So I just went through some of my records, and I think I possibly wasn't taking advantage of exacta opportunities as well as I should have. So, I kind of getting married to the try and the super at some points to where I was using that tool more often than I should have. I was underusing my exacta tool. So, that was one thing that, and I really learned that from my record keeping, in that I noticed that I was betting a higher percentage of my yearly wagering total on trifectas. That had increased. The difference between trifectas and exacta wagering had increased, and what was the reason for that? And then I decided there wasn't any logical reason, that I was just kind of becoming addicted to the trifecta and the superfecta. So I wanted to like catch myself there, bring that back more into balance. And also I've been trying to the Timeform US site is an underused tool for me also. And I really want to spend more time learning the fine points of it. And Jonathan has helped me a little bit there. And I think it would be more helpful to me. It would obviously be more helpful to me, the more the fine points of that site that I learn and am able to incorporate that more into my handicapping.
And Pete, one of the other things that I do want to remember, an actual tangible thing, not just not a broad statement, that I've been doing, that I used to do it and I kind of got away from it. I started kind of handicapping a little bit faster than I used to. I think that Mike will probably comment on this too, is when you start taking really good trip notes and you have trip notes to your disposal, you just you stop watching replays as much when you're trying to figure out a certain scenario. And so I've tried to incorporate, even though I have a great trip note, when the time is there, or if I think that the trouble or the situation I'm trying to evaluate is significant enough, I want to watch the tape back again. So that's one of the things I've been trying to do better. The other one is that I used to do that I got away from is when I heard Mike talk about Timeform, it reminded me, we've talked about it before, on Timeform, where the, typically where the names of the first, second, third place horses are. If you click on that, it'll pull up the chart from the race before. And so if a horse gets a figure of 100, I will click on that and then see what the other horses in that race have done coming out of it. And very often you'll see, if a horse had 100, you'll see that like 7 horses that have come out of that race have all declined in their figure. And it just could be a day of a I don't want to call it a bad figure, but a figure that wasn't as accurate as we would have liked. And a lot of times it will help you validate that 100 or to downgrade that 100. And that is one of the things that has been really, 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 really big for me in finding some good opportunities this year.
I like it. Mike, let's loop back to that question about betting strategy that came in over the transom. You talk about this the book at length, and I don't want to give away the. I do think a quick reflection is on how you view Jonathan's crush their souls mentality when it comes to bet construction, and how your version of that in what you do.
Yes, I have something which is basically it's the same concept that I've used for years, and I call it the kill bet. And the kill bet is just it's the actual putting into practice of the concept of you need to really get paid when you're right. So it's taking part of your money and making sure that you really make a score when you're exactly right. And because it developed from the feeling that I'm sure every horse player's had, where you watch a race that you're interested in, that you had a strong opinion in, and the race runs exactly like you would have predicted before the race started. And yet when you cash your tickets, or when you leaf through your tickets after the race, you think, wow, I made money, but I didn't really do what I should have done there. I should have absolutely destroyed that race, crushed their souls, as JK says, and I didn't really do it. So after I had experienced that feeling enough times, then I developed the kill bet concept, where that keeps me from really loving a race, having it run that way, and feeling like I didn't hit it as hard as I should have.
And that you also have you talk about the flip side of the coin, and we'll let folks go to the book for the rest of it. But the equally important concept, the one that JK was talking about, the lock it up bets. But we'll allow, again, we got to encourage people to buy this book, Mike. So we won't give away everything. But that's only the important thing, I guess, is that that's only one part of your philosophy. Let's move on to some other questions. We have so many good ones. This one comes in from a friend of the podcast and frequent podcast guest, Chris Larmy. He says, in the book, Mike talks a little bit about the difference between will pays and win odds. I would like to hear more about how he factors that information into his wagering and handicapping decisions. What do you say, Mike?
First, I want to say that Chris had some very nice comments online about the book, and I want to thank Chris publicly for that. That was very fulfilling for me to hear, from someone that I respect as much as Chris, to hear those good comments about the book. As far as the win odds, versus the will pays, I think the number one thing there is that in today's world, we all worry about making a win bet and then having our odds sliced by 20, 30, 40% or more on the last splash. So you can avoid having that surprise ending to your win bet by looking at the will pays and making yourself familiar with those at the circuits you play. If you just spend a few races doing that, just looking at the things you want to consider are the morning line odds for the horse, especially the horse that's the program favorite, the horse that has the lowest morning line odds will get played a little heavier in daily doubles and will pays moving forward. I guess that just being the human nature factor of players being concerned about leaving out the favorite in their plays. So you have to factor that in a little bit. And what I mean by that is those horses will get that a little heavier. So if a horse is the morning line favorite and yet he is not the favorite in the will pays, you can be almost certain that he will not be the favorite in the actual betting, in the win odds. So little things like that will help you determine, is this horse that's 3-1 on the board with a minute till post, is he really going to close near 3-1, or is he more likely to go down to 8-5? Is he more likely to float up to 9-2? So the win odds, the will pays can definitely direct you in that decision.
And to Mike's point, I've actually seen Mike do this. And when you read the book, you'll see some of Mike's bet construction is not overly complicated, but it's not, you ain't going to the window and making trifecta boxes. So one of the things that I think using the will pays helps is that in the perfect handicapping world, you could pause the world at 0 minutes to post and see what the last flash of the odds are and then construct your bet. But we all know that's not the case. You don't have the time to do that. So using those will pays can give you that extra time, because we get 25 minutes to construct a bet. I mean, obviously you can work on it earlier, but 25 minutes with odds on the board of what the public is thinking, and using those will pays and those probables can allow you to get a head start on your bet construction and doing it in an efficient way. I mean, even looking at the double probables the race before, you can understand, this horse is probably going to be the favorite, which could completely change your betting strategy. And so I think that it gives you more time to make an educated wager using those tools.
I want you also, JK, to follow up, since Chris, obviously tournament player, head of the NTRA Players Committee, and very accomplished player in his own right. Talk about how you look at, I've seen you use will pays, especially in mythical contests. I guess it's a pretty similar point, but if you could elaborate a little bit as a contest player, how you use the will pays.
Yeah, sure. Once enemy good friend Ryan Flanders beat me in a tournament one time when
you say that, JK. You say that, JK, but you did cut him in line. I mean, what was the guy supposed to do?
Well, he wasn't moving fast enough. Get on your horse. That's like, that's what I heard Angel Cordero say it. He shouldn't have been there. He shouldn't have been in that spot. So I think one of the biggest things is for me is the end game, right? Which is one of my favorite parts of tournaments, is like that last race, the last two races. And what happened in that situation with Ryan was I needed a certain horse to be able to catch him, or maybe it was the other way around. And I was trying to predict what the final number was going to be by looking at the will pays, because I couldn't take anything less than like 4-1. And so the horse was teetering back and forth between 9-2 and 3.5-1, 9-2, 3.5-1. And so I think it's important to be able to look at the will pays to be able to identify, at least you're not going to be able to nail it down, but have an idea which click you're going to get. Are you going to get the good click or the bad click? And you can usually get a hint by looking at the will pays for that. So I think that's really important when you're trying to strategize in that regard. And so in game without the will pays to me is a really tough one to do.
Eric Bialik had a couple of good questions I want to make sure we get in here. He says, Mike, in the book, you talk a lot about your biggest losing day with Black Tie Affair, but what was your biggest winning day? Was it the Derby Pick 6 that you start the book by talking about?
Well, actually, it wasn't the Derby Pick 6, but, I've had a few days that are kind of similar. So it's not one, huge thing that stands out. And I'm not, that's not the most comfortable thing for me to go over those things. But
you'd rather talk about when you lose than when you win. Is that what you're saying? I'm not I like to hear a good racing story, but I'm not like overly entertained when with the guy that at the next table in the simulcast parlor that wants to tell you about how he's dominated the races for years and all the big scores that he's had every Breeders' Cup race in Kentucky Derby since 1932.
So what Mike's saying is he's tired of hearing about Devisidero.
I'm glad you made the joke, JK, because if you didn't, I was going to. You're racing to the punchline on that one. Another great one from Eric. Mike, what's left on your racing bucket list? Tracks, experiences, bets you'd like to win, contests you'd like to win. What do you still think about accomplishing in the game?
Well, the one that kind of pops in my mind, I would love. First of all, I would love to go to some of the smaller tracks that I play sometimes. That I've never been to Thistledown. I've never been to Remington. Just some places like that you spend some hours grinding out trying to decipher the code there, but you've never walked in the place. So that would be fun, and I hope to do that at some point. But the thing that pops into my head is, not that this actual contest is really some kind of dream to me, but everyone would like to win the NHC, and for me, the money would be great. It would be great to say that you'd won the contest, but I would just love to get those 5 minutes at the Eclipse Awards. I think I think I could make good use of that. I think I could wake up some people, and I think some people would maybe go to the bathroom when they saw me getting ready to take the stage, because they might know what was coming at them. So, I've thought about that more than once. And when my friend John Doyle won it, I actually lobbied him to throw grenades from the stage, but he wouldn't exactly take the bait.
Amazing.
JK, I'm waiting on you to get your turn, and I think I can talk you into it.
What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go up there with a laptop, and I'm gonna open it up, and I'm just gonna Skype you in and let you go to work.
All right, but man, I'm in.
If folks are wondering the type of advice and waking up that Mike is talking about, it's all in the 7th part of Betting with an Edge, Mike's experiences as a horse player advocate, and a tiny little bit of his prescription for racing going forward. I recommend you check it out. Might be an interesting future topic. Just Mike, getting you on here to talk about some industry issue stuff. But I also just wanted to make the observation, folks, this is what a real horse player sounds like. I think you get most people on here talking bucket list. They're talking Prix de l'Arc de Triomphe. They're talking Royal Ascot. No. Mike wants to go to Thistledown and Remington. How awesome is that? All right, let's move on. We got a bunch more questions to get to. We had a question come in I thought was interesting. Mike, it was asking you, what are the benefits that you get from making your own figures as opposed to using commercially available figures?
Yeah, okay. I had this conversation recently with my good friend Sean Borman, who we exchanged a lot of information, and we played together off and on for years, and exchanged information for years. And Sean's one of the best handicappers and horse players around, and he tells me from time to time, hey, I think we only have so many hours in a week, and I think there would be better use of your time than grinding over spending the 5 hours you do each week on a single circuit to do your figures. And he has good points for that, and he's a very sharp guy, so I respect anything he tells me like that. But I continue to do them, and the main reason is, yes, I still feel like the figures are beneficial to me in my gambling. But the overriding reason that I spend those 5 hours still each week is that I know it keeps me in touch. The actual activity of doing those figures each week keeps me in very close touch with everything that's happening at that racetrack. So, for example, when I'm making figures, anytime I see a horse that ran maybe a surprisingly good race, say a 30-1 shot that ran a close second, I immediately look at the trainer of that horse. I look at, if he was a shipper, I look at the track he shipped in from. If he was racing at the local track, I go back and look at his PPs and try to figure out where that race came from. And I find by doing that I, some people would say, well, you have a sixth sense sometimes at the racetrack when you're putting these bets together. I don't know how you do that. You always seem to pull something together that's on the fringes. Well, the way that happens sometimes is that I have seen a trainer that ran two horses that ran third maybe the week before. And, he's not on any hot trainer list for anyone because he didn't even win a race last week. But I can see that his horses are cycling forward. And it's not just one horse, it's multiple horses. So he's on my radar screen. And when I see him in a race the next week with a 20 or 30-1 shot, even even though that horse may handicap out to be the fourth or fifth best horse in the race, I know I have a huge edge gambling-wise if I key him in trifectas and superfectas and just count on him running better and count on him maybe running third or fourth there at a huge price. So, that's a small thing, and it's a thing where if I weren't doing those figures, if I weren't doing that level of work, I would never pick up on it. I would just be another guy at the track that sees that 30-1 shot run in and say, hey, that guy's, hadn't won a race in 12 starts at the meet. Where did that come from? But in reality, it was there to be found, but you just had to be really deep into the data.
Keeping you in tune. I think that's a phrase you've used before. JK, you got to follow up on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, channeling one of our other favorites, Paul Matisse, what I've always heard him explain it in the way is like he wants to know the fast races because he wants to bet the fast races. And unfortunately, commercial figures, they don't want to be wrong. They don't want to be wrong because they understand their power for the public. When Mike makes a figure, Sean makes a figure, Paul makes a figure, they're okay with the idea that they could be wrong because if they're right, there's actually a reward there for them. So they're okay giving that fast number that Beyer or Craig Milkowski might project down. And so they want to know those fast figures. And I also think that, it reminds me of one of my favorite speeches in a movie ever was Al Pacino in Any Given Saturday, or Any Given Sunday, excuse me. I'm obviously a horse player. Where he says, he said it's a game of inches, and the inches we need are everywhere. And I agree with that, even when it comes to racing. I mean, it's a game of inches. If you think about it, how many times, I lost $1 million by an inch. If you're going to play this game, then you need to try to pick up those inches every opportunity you have. And in doing figures, and trying to find a way where you can be right when the public is, or you can zig when the public is zagging. Those are very important inches. And so I understand and respect why they take the time to do this.
There's a book, Mike, right? You're talking about bias. You know the one I'm referring to?
Exactly. How many times during your year would half a length make the whole difference in your year? And there was I think there was a Twitter discussion about that line in the book. Everybody telling their story, it took on a life of its own because then everybody wanted to tell their story of it. I don't even need a half length, they would say. I just need a neck. I just need a nose. But my point in the book is, a lot of people think that bias is, that's too much work to try to keep up with all that. Well, and some biases are so minor, why should I try to keep up with it? Well, my point in the book was, if it's a bias that's affecting horses by half a length, if the next time that horse runs, if he was a half a length better in his previous race than what the rest of the public is, or most of the rest of the public is judging him on, and then, you in my mind, you kind of have a half length edge on everybody else. So how often would that half length change your world?
That's great. We got so many questions from Darren Sipes. He had one specifically related to bias that I think is perfect to bring up here. He says, regarding a guy like me who's primarily a weekend warrior with a family and 40-hour-a-week job, how would you suggest I might get an edge on track bias at, say, Turfway Park this winter?
I think the first thing I would do is, and this wouldn't take long at all, is make a quick track profile. And I know you can get that, from a lot of sites, but I think it would be beneficial to a player to do that on their own. Kind of the same concept I just talked about you're really making a deep dive down into the data. By making that track profile at Turfway, you're going to find, is there the answers to questions like, is there a difference between 1-turn and 2-turn races in how live closers are at those distances? You're going to discover little nuances about the racetrack that might take you a long time just through observation to come to those conclusions. So, what you're doing is you're just fast tracking yourself. The time that you invest in doing the deeper dive into the data, or it could be something like doing some trainer stat work on Formulator. I've mentioned that I think last podcast, that maybe you could just click on a trainer's name when he had a horse in and go back and research what he's good at and what he's not so good at. Well, if you could limit that to Turfway and include that in your analysis. So, you could spend 2 or 3 hours, and even when I was a weekend warrior, I was in that same spot for years. When I was in that spot, you can find that time once in a while. You can't find it every week, but you can find it once in a while to do a little research. And just what that does is it just fast tracks you. Where it might take you a year of watching races at Turfway to get to a certain spot in your analysis, you can get there in 2 or 3 hours, when you're really focusing on the data.
When you're doing a track profile like that, I know that concept very well from the classic Tom Brohammer Modern Pace Handicapping book, but is there like a quick Cliff Note version, Mike, you could give for somebody looking to create a track profile, or would you suggest them to check out information online or in the Brohammer book?
It's just depending, Pete, on how deeply they want to get into it. I certainly would suggest, checking out the Brohammer book, and it's all laid out, in a very academic form there. I'm more of a, kind of a feel type guy, seat of my pants maybe type guy. And I would tend to do it just by, getting out a legal pad. I'm a dinosaur. I guess today's person would do some spreadsheet or something. But you can just. I don't think it matters so much what form you use. I think it's just locking in yourself mentally to that little problem solving exercise, and you're gonna find some information that's going to be helpful to you in your gambling, but through any approach that you would try.
One cool tool I'll mention, and this is part of DRF Plus, if you're a DRF Plus member, and if not, consider it. There's a lot of great info there. They have something called the Winner's Book, and you can go to the Winner's Book we'll use Turfway as the example, and you can see a lot of this info laid out right there, and it'll even tell you for the winner, for example, how far back they were at the pace call. I believe it's in there for every race, and jockeys and trainers. Just a lot of interesting info that you could actually cut and paste into a spreadsheet and play around with. I remember when I was over in England in 2015 doing that with New York turf races, and it gives you a whole new view. So you can do it fully manual, like Mike suggests, with looking at old charts, which obviously you can find online, and maybe even, the legal pad and whatnot. But the Winner's Book from DRF Plus might cut out a little bit of the middle there if you want to check that out. Here's a fun one, Mike, that you might have already answered when you talked about that sixth sense and where it comes from. But it's kind of an interesting question. Do you ever go with a hunch or instinct about a horse that is outside of your handicapping of a particular race?
I really don't, Pete. Sometimes I will stray away from my hard figures that I have in the race. But when I do that, it's because I have a strong conviction about a trainer angle or about some hot connection of some type or a track bias. So it's I like to think that that any bet I make is going to be grounded in some either on a figure basis, or there's going to be some betting angle behind that has me interested in making the bet.
JK, I know you had a bunch of questions for Mike from last time that we didn't get to because we had so many good ones from the listeners, but I think we're doing pretty well here. We have a few more listener questions to ask, and I know we have a story we want to get to at the bottom of the hour here. Put Mike on for another Tales from the Track action, but why don't you hit him up with a question or two?
Yeah, Mike taught me something really, really cool that I learned a lot from, and to make the POTUS capper happy. he made it. We should probably get away from bias. He I don't know if you guys saw his tweet, but he said, "Always enjoy Mr. Maloney, but you collectively said bias 2,000 times, and no one gives you crap for it. Crooked DRF, fake news."
I know. There's some other people who have that feelings about DRF these days. We'll be getting to that later in the week in my column. Oh, it'll have already run by the time you hear that. So people.
Man.
Joke.
I love that. I love that guy on Twitter, and I can't believe that I got a mention there. Which now I feel like I'm famous, and I didn't even notice. Like what?
No, but Mike, you taught me something that you do, and I did it for a while before the 2016 NHC, and now I just kind of do it a little bit more indirectly. But you talked about how you try to find jockeys that are riding well, and one of the things you'll do is in your form, which a lot of people, and I don't know how much you address it in the book, but watching you operate, you take a lot of notes in your actual form itself, and so you highlight when a jockey has a good ride or a bad ride, regardless of the outcome of the race. And I think that really helped me open my eyes to some guys that were really riding well. I mean, and guys that you might even have like a weird indirect thought that they're not that good or they do a lot of bonehead things. And next thing you know, you have all these positive marks about them giving good rides, just not getting the job done. So I wanted you to kind of talk a little bit about that whole idea of kind of taking those notes and what it's led to and what are some of the things people can look for.
Well, JK, it's part of my basic trip handicapping, and we go into that concept in depth in the book. But it really isn't something separate that I do. It's just that when a horse, I make designations in my trip notes when a horse is in a perfect spot, because I want to know that when he comes back. I'll seriously downgrade horses that just get in that really prime position early in a race, or a lot of horses will stay there throughout the race. Well, I know that horse probably can't run any better than he ran in that race because he just got a dream trip. And some horses will run out of their mind when they get that trip. They'll run a race that they'll never run back in the rest of their career. So I just want to make myself aware of that through the trip notes. Well, an unexpected benefit from that was that I started noticing that I would put these perfect trip marks on horses that were ridden by the same jockeys a lot of times. And a lot of times it's the top jockeys, and it's like, well, everybody knows that already. But sometimes it's surprisingly will be, and when I really get excited is when it's a younger jockey that is not, viewed as one of the top riders at that circuit. And I, so I know that I found an undervalued guy. I found a guy that maybe he's just not getting the quality of mounts yet where he can stack up the numbers and be the leading rider or be the, contend for the leading rider. But I see that he has the ability. I see that he's doing everything he can do with the mounts he's being given. So, a quick example of that is I hope I don't butcher this guy's name, but there's a kid that's riding at Fairgrounds that I think he shipped over from Europe maybe, and his name's Adam Bashiza. And the first horse he rode for Joe Sharp at the Fairgrounds this meet, I'm like, holy crap, this horse got an absolutely perfect trip. Who is this kid, So then the next horse he rides, it's the same thing. And horses are like really finishing for him. So immediately I'm treating him the same way I'm treating Florent Geroux at the Fairgrounds. I'm making them equal as I'm doing my ability times. I'm making Geroux and this Adam Bashiza cat equal. And it turns out, that was the right thing to do because the kid's been on fire down there, and he's just, he's still in, in this perfect spot. He's just living there. So, last summer when I was at Del Mar, I was tripping the races, and Flavian Pratt was like in the perfect spot all the time. It was just amazing to me.
So much stuff in the book. Mike goes into great depth in the book about the trip handicapping process and this concept of riders being in the circle as it's described in the book. And Mike also mentioned that concept of ability times or ability figures, goes into great depth in the book there in how he creates those and how they'll often end up differing significantly from the printed buyer figures in the form. In fact, at some point next year, we might try to enlist Mike into doing a handicapping session where we demonstrate in real time the process of making those ability figures. You think you might be up for something like that, Mike?
Sure, Pete.
Excellent. It should be cool. And I think that's such a great point about catching those up and coming riders, and obviously going to help you a lot with your vertical wagers as well. Those riders who are in perfect spots are going to end up filling out the third and fourth spots, even when they don't have the best horses. And then as the quality of their mounts improves, their results go hand in hand, I would imagine. Right, Mike?
That's right. And, it's valuable in the, like you say, mostly in the deep verticals in the beginning. But, those guys they almost always end up being top level riders.
All right. We have a Keeneland specific question that this one needs to be asked. Pete would like to hear your views on takeout and whether your action and or rebate went up or down at Keeneland this fall after the takeout hike.
Well, my thoughts on takeout, we don't have enough time in the rest of the show probably, but quickly, my thoughts on takeout are just that we price our product in racing, we overprice it, and that we hurt ourselves by doing that. And I think the statistics show that over the last 10 years, we've lost roughly 25% of our handle in the U.S. So, there's no reason other than pricing that should have happened. So I think the market's telling us that our product is overpriced. Racing is not reacting very quickly to that. Matter of fact, by the takeout races that we've had at Keeneland and other places are show that racing leadership doesn't agree with me on that. But it's a big deal in racing, and it's something that's a constant source of frustration for me. And I hope that in the near future that racing's leadership will take a harder look at the pricing component.
And how about the specific effect for you of the takeout race at Keeneland this fall? And then we got to get to our story.
Well, it's not a positive thing for me when takeout, is raised, and I have to make adjustments, and it in today's landscape with the rebates, that gets very complicated. But yes, that's very true, whether it's Keeneland or any other track. When prices are changed, I have to change my business model and adjust to that.
And so maybe just to answer his basic question, you ended up betting less at Keeneland, I assume that means?
Less than I have at some meets. So there's a lot of outside factors that factor into that too. So it's just a complicated question for me.
Generally speaking, though, the higher takeout is, the harder it is for you to bet. That's fair to say.
Yes, obviously so. It's as a quick example, this is an example we use in the book, is I bet probably 40% at most of what I bet at my peak. And the reason is not because I choose to bet less. The reason is that through host fees, through takeout increases, through whatever mechanism, the racing has increased my net cost of a wager to the degree that I have had to adjust my business model to reflect that. So less opportunity as my cost of going a wager, as my cost of making a wager goes up. Therefore, my business model forces me to bet less in those situations. So it's just it's another. That's not the only reason that handle goes down over the last 10 years, but it has an impact on the weekend warrior. It has an impact on the smaller player, and it also has an impact on players at the highest wagering levels. So it's not good. The higher prices are not working out from any segment of the market that I can determine.
And just to underline, because you're betting so much less, even though the track's getting more out of every dollar wagered, they're making less off of you in aggregate. True or false?
True, and I'm pretty up to date on what what racing industry actually makes from my wagers after being in it all these years, and I estimate in the book that they make less than half of what they made for me at one point. So my estimate in the book is that they make roughly $400,000 less per year from me, one individual, than they did previously at the different pricing model. So I'm an example of the pricing changes have not been a good idea and are not good for any segment of racing, whether it be the tracks long term, the horsemen long term, the states that take their cut from the action, and definitely not good for the players.
All right, we've got 5 minutes left. I want to hear the rope story. You want me to set it up, or do you want to set it up?
Up to you. Whatever you like.
But your dad is such an amazing character, and he's in the book throughout. And in many ways, working on it, I consider it his book as much as yours, Mike. So central is he to the story. And your dad wasn't without some idiosyncrasies and some anachronistic tendencies. And this story demonstrates one of those. But I think, like in his criticism of riders throughout the book, you can tell the kind of man he was in his heart. So can you in hearing this tale. But I just like it too much, and I want you to tell it anyway, if you don't mind.
All right, I don't mind at all. I'm always glad to talk about Dad. Dad liked to say he was the epitome of old school. If you looked up old school in the dictionary, there's Dad's picture next to it. And he loved to say that he was from an era when boats were made of wood and men were made of steel. One of his favorite lines. So that'll just give you a little insight into the guy we're talking about here. So Dad and I had planned a day trip to Beulah Park to bet the races, which was a common occurrence for us. This is a long time ago. This is back 30 years ago. So a friend of mine who was a college friend, Dan, calls me that morning, and when he asks what I'm doing, I tell him about the racetrack trip, and he wants to come. So I say, sure, you'll make 4. My dad's friend was going with us. So I say, make sure you're on time. So it was rare for Dan, but he actually shows up on time. We leave. We start to get in a sedan and start a 3.5-hour one-way trip to Beulah Park. So it's going to be a long racetrack day. Dan and I are in the back seat. Dan's a very gregarious guy, not shy at all. And after about a half an hour, he leans over to me and he says, hey, could you ask your dad to pull over? These are the days before cell phones. Can you ask your dad to pull over and let me use the payphone? My wife is about to have a baby. She's 9 months pregnant. We're due any minute. And, some people would say, well, what in the world are you doing going to the racetrack? But, if you knew Dan, it would be no surprise. But so can you ask your dad to pull over? And I said, well, you ask him if you want to ask him. So Dan says from the back seat, Mr. Maloney, would you pull over? My wife's pregnant and I need to check on her, and I'll just need to make a quick phone call. Well, Dad doesn't flinch, answer, react in any way. He just keeps driving. So about 5 minutes later, Dan leans over to me and he says, you think he heard me? And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'm pretty sure he heard you. And so Dan waits. He doesn't know really what to do. He waits another 10 minutes, and he says, excuse me, in a louder voice, Mr. Maloney, my wife is 9 months pregnant. Can you please pull over? I just need to tell her what I'm doing and check in with her. my dad says, son, let me explain something to you. When a man gets in a vehicle that's headed to the racetrack with other men, that man has made a commitment to go to the track and to understand that vehicle will not stop unless there's some kind of mechanical issue or some other disaster. Furthermore, let me tell you something about marriage. Marriage is like a tug of war. In the beginning, you and your wife each get an end of the rope. And every concession, every compromise that you make, you give up a few inches of that rope and you never get it back. So I'm actually doing you a favor by driving onto the racetrack like a man is supposed to do. And I'm further doing you a favor by teaching you something about the way marriage really works. So Dan is kind of dumbfounded, which one of the few times I ever saw him dumbfounded, and we drive onto the track. So fast forward now, like 3 months later, and it's Keeneland's live meet. And at that time, my friends, mostly my college friends, and I and their girlfriends and wives and family, we had about 20 seats in the Keeneland grandstand every Saturday of the meet. And they were always the same seats. And it was a fun time and a gathering spot, and everybody got to catch up with each other. So Dad and I are in the seats, and Dan shows up, who is usually in khakis and a T-shirt. He shows up in a suit with a tie and a top coat. And he has his wife, who's also dressed to the nines, with him. His new wife. They haven't been married less than a year. So he walks in down the aisle, and he has to squeeze by everyone. He comes in our aisle, and he's going to go past us to his seats. Well, as he gets to us, he stops, and I had met Fran, his wife, before, and I say hello. And then he says, oh, and Fran, I want you to meet Mike's dad. This is Mr. Maloney. And my dad always liked pretty women, and my dad just lights up, and he stands up and holds her hand and says, oh, my, aren't you beautiful? What a lovely girl. And so nice to meet you. And Fran says, oh, Mr. Maloney, nice to meet you too. You're the rope guy. Dad's face just drops, and he just crumbles into his seat, doesn't know what to say. But it was a hilarious thing to witness.
Oh, that's tremendous. What do you make of that story, JK?
Oh, touching way too close to home.
All right, we are out of time, gentlemen. I'm so glad we got that one in there. It's classic stuff. I could see it was tricky to fit into the book, but it's amazing and told with love. And
so fun.
Thank you for sharing. Lots of great stuff about Mike's dad in the book, and he generally comes off better in the stories, but that one's just hilarious. I don't think he would have minded you sharing it here today. All right, we are done. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thanks, Mike Maloney. Thanks, Jonathan Kinchin. Thanks to everyone for listening, especially folks who submitted questions. If I pull it together, there's going to be a show later this week, a year in review. I hope I make good on that promise. Recording this on the 19th. It's about 50-50, but I'm going to do my best. Saying it out loud maybe will help get it done. I'm Peter Thomas Fornatal. I'll see you when I see you. Merry Christmas, and may you win all your photos.